Hey everyone, welcome back to week 3 of our series, Won't You Be My Neighbor? And through this series, we're looking at what it really means to be a neighbor or to love the people around us as Jesus commands and he asks us to do. And so if you haven't been with us for the last couple of weeks, I just want to start by catching you up. And we started with the series with looking at the story of the Good Samaritan, about a guy who gets beat up and the people that passed and didn't help, and then the hated Samaritan who went out of his way and loved sacrificially. So Jesus really defines this as the picture of being a great neighbor, a good neighbor, loving people that even if that you might hate the most. And this was the define that Jesus uses to say this is a neighbor and this is the way you're supposed to love one another. So last week we went a little further and talked about how loving other people starts with learning to love God. And when we increase our love of God, then we start caring about the things that he cares about. And that is just simply humanity. And as we fall more in love with God, he begins to give us the love we need for other people. Now, there's a story about a guy whose car gets stuck in a muddy hole, and a farmer comes along and says he'll help him pull the car out of the mud, but he's going to have to charge him $50 because this is the 10th time that he's had to pull the car out of the mud today. The driver thanks him and says, "When do you have time to plow your land? At night?" And the farmer says, No, night's when I fill the hole with water." This week, I kind of want to change the discussion a little bit and talk about a key element of loving our neighbors, and that's loving ourselves. And sometimes this is a hard line to walk because, like that farmer, loving ourselves and loving others is not easy to find a balance between. So we can be helping others out of love, but really, at the end, it's selfish ambition. And so this balance in this line is really hard to find. So here's the deal. In this teaching, Jesus says something that's a little bit confusing, and I think we miss it if we don't pay attention. And in this passage, he tells us that our love for our neighbors is really centered in our love for ourselves. And what's weird is that the standard that Jesus uses to measure our love for other people is ourselves. This is the place on the measuring scale that we're supposed to measure it. And now, most of the time when I read that verse, I would pass over that part of it, or I would read it and interject more than into the passage. Love your neighbor more than yourself. Because surely Jesus isn't asking me to love myself. And it seemed a little more counterintuitive than what I imagined. Because I always been taught to put others before myself, or to love them more than myself. I'd even memorized verses that said I should not love myself. That there were people that their sin was loving themselves instead of loving God. But it appears that Jesus is asking that those that were listening to love ourselves as the basis or starting point really for our love for others. But this is kind of like this wide open concept. And Jesus really doesn't take the time to explain either. So all we're really left with is that there's a direct connection between loving ourselves and our love for other people. Which means that the way we love ourselves is even more important because it directly impacts the way we love other people. The thing is that loving ourselves with correct balance is not an easy task. I'm sure if you think about it, you could think of somebody that loves themselves a little too much. You know the type of person I'm talking about, the persons that thinks that they're God's gift to humanity, that they can do no wrong. And in the same way, I'm sure that if you thought about it, you could think of somebody that has a hard time loving themselves. They believe that they can do nothing right. They're always hard on themselves and never think they're good enough and never give themselves place. And both of these extremes are equally unhealthy and they impact the way we love other people. And this balance is really hard to strike because honestly, we don't talk about it very much. We might talk about loving others and we might talk about having a healthy self-image and a healthy view of ourselves. But when we realize these two are connected and impact each other, it changes our dialogue, really. Listen, when we're talking about loving others, we've talked about sacrificial love that's required for loving others, especially those that are hard to love, but there's something that's connected in that way we love ourselves and the ability to love others. It is hard to love people beyond the degree with which we love ourselves. And here's what I mean. Let me start with the reality that we're called to love ourselves. And this is confusing because the people in church do get a little touchy about it. But I believe there's something in the heart of God that wants us to walk in this place of knowing that as we're loved by God, we can rest in that towards ourselves, that living out that love in our own lives is the expression of God's love for ourselves and then ultimately through to others. In 1 John 4, it talks about the fact that we're able to love because he first loved us. And even when we didn't deserve it, he still loved us. And until we can learn to accept that love, we really can't give love away. So when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, what he is not saying is that you should get all caught up on how great and awesome you are and spend all your time looking in the mirror. What he's saying is that the measure that you receive the love from God, it should also be the love that we rest in that and then turn around and give it away. The way you need to be loved by God is the way that you should love other people. Now, as I said, the trap is that if we love ourselves, we can easily fall into pride. And this is kind of the worry, right? Like, I don't want to love myself because I don't want to fall into this place of pride or over self-infatuation. And this is why I think people fall away from this, shy away from this topic a lot of times. But I want you to also see something else today. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul defines love. And in doing so, he lists what real love, selfless love, looks like. And it says, be patient, be kind, not boastful, humble, polite, flexible, not irritable, not keeping record of wrong, rejoicing in good, believing, hoping, enduring. These are all the things of how love looks. Now, just take a moment and look at those areas again and fill in yourself in those areas. Are you really patient with yourself? Are you humble about yourself? Are you kind with yourself? Do you see where I'm going with this? Because as we love ourselves by this measure that Paul lays out, it impacts directly and has this huge impact on the way we live out for other people too. Listen carefully. The measure for which we apply biblical love towards ourselves is that same measure we can give it away. Here's what I mean. I think this is a great example. How many of you have been around somebody who has a lot of success? Like everything just happens to go their way. And how many of you, when you see that, you can feel this little tinge of jealousy, or you see somebody get recognized and there's something that rises up within us that it just is really hard to be happy for them in that place of success. So let me dissect this for a second, because to me this is a key example of what Jesus is talking about. When we know our place with God, we don't have to try to measure up to receive his love. The fact that we are loved because we are loved, because we are loved, because we are loved is more than enough. And then when other people start to get noticed, we can begin to celebrate those accomplishments at the same level that we would our own accomplishments, because we love them the way we would ourselves. And love doesn't measure. So if you remember, we talked about the people that love themselves too much and those that don't enough. The key to this idea is this measurement and this comparison. The idea of comparison kills love, and love kills comparison. Listen, Jesus loves us and calls each individually a masterpiece. One that when we give ourselves to him, he can use to transform, and these places of sin he can begin to change and deal with. And when we can accept that, when we can walk firmly in that place, we don't have to play the comparison game. Because that can be the most damaging thing that we can do to ourselves and to other people. Because when we love others like we love ourselves, we're able to rejoice in their victories, and we don't have to feel like they're attacking our victories or making us feel less than. Because this comparison is no longer in play. So for the sake of time, I can't get all the way into all of this concept the way I need to. But so hopefully in your small group, some of the questions will help shift this out. But when we understand God's love for us, like we talked about last week, it changes something in us that allows us to have love for ourselves. That means we don't have to seek approval, acceptance, validation from anywhere else. And when that happens, we no longer have to measure ourselves against others. And we can give them love freely because we're not having to play the competition game. So when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, what he means is apply these principles of love internally first so that they can flow externally. Want for others what you would want for yourself. Give to others what you would want them to give, because when that love for yourself is in place, love doesn't become conditional. I don't have to measure your love for me before I can give love to you. I can love you the way I would love myself because I'm not worried about comparison anymore. Now, unfortunately, this measurement impacts all types of relationships. It's the comparison of each other. It's the measurement of right and wrong. It's the measurement of who did what and who gave what and where did it all go wrong. But let me tell you something. When we understand that in the right place, right here between us and God, when we get this right, we don't have to become dependent upon others being our measure. And that's when we can freely love other people. So this week, look at your relationships, good, bad, and different, and see the places that you find yourself measuring. Let me give you some examples. Maybe it's that voice of insecurity when nobody laughs at your jokes. Why is that there? Maybe it's the place of doubt when your best friend walks away with somebody else to go to class and you're feeling left out. Why is that there? Whatever is, look at those places and start asking God to fill you with His love for you in those places. Because when we know that His love for us, we can love ourselves in a way that we can give that love away. And love for others really begins with a love for God and then ultimately ourselves. Hope to see you guys next week.